Why was she even there? That was the question on everyone's face, though no one dared ask it aloud. The morning air was thin, carrying the kind of silence that only comes before a test no one wants to fail. A dozen trainees fidgeted at the firing line, boots grinding against gravel, rifles slung awkwardly as if the weapons weighed heavier than they should. But she stood apart, small, quiet, almost fragile in appearance. She wasn't supposed to belong here. Adjusted her stance, not at the line but several feet back, crouched low, watching. Her eyes weren't on the clipboard Sergeant Murphy held or on the men around her who flexed shoulders and cracked jokes too loud for the stillness. Her focus stretched across the range, past the dust and mist, to the targets that barely showed through the early light. She studied the way the wind teased the edge of a flag, how it shifted in tiny, nearly invisible patterns. To her, this wasn't just a field with targets. It was a puzzle, a living thing with answers hidden in motion and silence. Murphy barked orders, calling names, assigning positions. He never looked at her. Maybe he'd forgotten she was there. Maybe he wished she was. She was, after all, listed as logistics, paperwork, supplies, and endless hours of inventory. Not rifles, not ranges. Certainly not the same tests meant for men who dreamed of sniper school. And yet here she was. Someone chuckled from the firing line, low enough to seem harmless but sharp enough that it cut. She probably thinks rifles are like makeup brushes. A ripple of amusement followed. Another voice muttered, "Bet she couldn't hit a barn wall at 20 feet." She didn't respond. She never did. Instead, she pulled a small cloth from her pocket and ran it gently over the barrel of the weapon leaning beside her. An old rifle, too old. Its wooden stock was nicked, the scope worn. Compared to the sleek black rifles the others carried, hers looked like an antique pulled from some forgotten armory. But it wasn't forgotten, not to her. The weapon had been her grandfather's, a Remington M24, older than she was, maintained with a devotion that bordered on ritual. Every groove, every scratch carried weight. When she touched it, she felt him. The man who'd raised her in the Montana mountains. The man soldiers once whispered about with a mixture of fear and reverence. Samuel Ghost, one of the most lethal snipers in SEAL Team 6 history. He'd never spoken much about the war, never glorified what he'd done. He taught her instead to respect silence, to respect the shot. That morning the memory of him was sharper than ever. She could almost hear his gravelly voice as she adjusted the scope, not to aim but to check the glass. Wind doesn't lie, men do. Learn to listen to what doesn't speak. Murphy's voice dragged her back. Targets at 400 meters, safety on until I say. Nobody screws this up or we're here all night. The men shouldered rifles. The exercise began. Shots cracked one after another, echoing against the hills. Dust rose. Metal clanged faintly when a round struck true. Most missed. The wind was cross-cutting hard now, pulling bullets wide. Murphy swore under his breath as another miss sparked off the dirt. Saw it instantly. The firing line was wrong. They were positioned at an angle that exaggerated the wind's cross-drift, and at longer ranges, accuracy would collapse. She hesitated, her grandfather's voice reminding her never to correct an officer in front of others, but the words slipped out anyway. "Sir, if the line shifts 5 meters west, the crosswind won't." Murphy snapped his head toward her, cutting her off before she could finish. His eyes narrowed as though the air itself had gone sour. "You're here for logistics, not tactics. Stick to your lane." The silence afterward burned worse than his tone. She could feel the weight of every stare, every smirk. She looked down, fingers tightening on the cloth she still held. Her grandfather had warned her about this too. The first battle you'll fight isn't with a rifle. It's with people who don't think you belong. She said nothing. When the training ended, she was handed a different task, cleaning every rifle, a punishment disguised as necessity. They left her in the armory with piles of weapons and dirty barrels. Her hands moved automatically, breaking down rifles, scrubbing, reassembling. It was work meant to keep her out of the way, meant to remind her that she didn't belong on the range. But to her it was study, Every weapon taught her something. Every scrape of carbon, every dent in a bolt, every rifle maintained too poorly to trust in combat, it was all data. She cleaned silently, breathing steady, heart calm. It was meditation. Voices carried down the hall, a group of men passing by. She caught the edge of their words. Should signed up for cooking duty. Logistics girl on a rifle range. What a joke. Their laughter lingered long after they'd gone. She let it wash over her, but inside, something hardened. That night she opened the wooden box hidden in her footlocker. Inside lay her grandfather's faded photograph, his tarnished ID card, a bronze medal long corroded, and a note. She unfolded it carefully, tracing the words with her finger. To my best student, the ghost. She read the last line again, the one he'd spoken to her in his final days. The shot that matters most isn't the one that hits the target. It's the one that proves you belong there in the first place. Her breath caught, and for a moment the barracks felt too small, too heavy. She set the note down, closed her eyes, and let the memory of the Montana dawns wash over her, mornings where the cold bit her skin, where the wind shifted faster than her breath, where her grandfather's voice anchored her in silence. She remembered the first time she hit a target over 1,000 meters. She was 13, too small for the rifle but stubborn. He hadn't congratulated her. He'd only said, again. And she had, over and over until the motions lived in her bones. Now here at Fort Logan, the motions were still there. The question was whether anyone would ever see them. The week that followed was worse. A training accident left one recruit panicked, firing outside his lane. The bullet ricocheted dangerously close to the observers. Chaos erupted. Officers scrambled. Shouts filled the air. Stationed in the equipment tent, had heard the shot and known instantly what was wrong. The recruit's angle was off 3 degrees, enough to create a ricochet path no one else had calculated. She pointed it out to the range officer, calm and precise. But instead of thanks, she received accusation. You were supposed to be in equipment, not analyzing shooting positions. Stay where you're told. The report later blamed civilian contractor misplacement as a contributing factor. Her punishment was swift, banned from the range for a week, reassigned to kitchen duty. If the armory had been a lesson, the kitchen was humiliation. Peeling potatoes, scrubbing pans, ignored by everyone. She endured it quietly, but while others thought they'd buried her under menial work, she was studying, watching. Every window, every corner, every elevated surface, she mapped them all. She trained without a rifle, running calculations in her mind, feeling the rhythm of the air even indoors. Her grandfather would have smiled. He taught her that survival wasn't about the battlefield you wanted. It was about adapting to the one you were given. The days passed. Saturday came. Mist clung low across the training field, thicker than usual, like smoke that refused to rise. This was the day of the advanced marksmanship test. Only the best attempted it, the candidates bound for sniper school. 3 shots, 400 meters, 700, and finally 1,100, beyond half a mile. Failure was expected. Success was rare. Lieutenant Daniels stood at the front, clipboard in hand. His roster showed a gap, 1 candidate sick, leaving an empty slot. He scanned the group, voice calm but firm. We need a replacement. Anyone qualified. No one moved. Silence stretched. Even among the elite, long-range tests intimidated. Then her voice broke through, steady, unshaken. I trained in the Montana Highlands. I can fill the position. Heads turned. A ripple of disbelief passed through the crowd. Some smirked, others frowned. It was either a joke or it was suicide. Daniel studied her for a long moment. He saw something in her stance, the calm weight in her posture, something he couldn't explain. This isn't basic qualification, he warned. Miss 1 target and you're done. She only nodded, and for the first time in days she felt the old rifle in her hands again, heavy, familiar, alive. What no one knew was that she wasn't just filling a slot. She was stepping into the place her grandfather had prepared her for all along. And when the first shot came, it would change everything. The first target seemed almost too close, 400 meters. To most shooters it was a stretch. To her it was a warm-up, but she knew better than to underestimate it. The test wasn't about distance alone. It was about control, about whether she would let nerves betray her. Lay prone on the gravel, the old M24 pressed against her shoulder. The rifle was heavier than the newer ones, and the stock dug into her collarbone, but the pressure was comforting. Familiar. She aligned her cheek to the worn comb, the scope glass scratched but still clear enough to cut through the mist. She didn't breathe for a moment, just listened. The air carried whispers moving across the range in uneven gusts. Flags snapped, grass bent. She let her eyes soften, catching the rhythm. Wind wasn't random. It had a pulse just like people did. One inhale, one exhale, pause, the trigger broke clean. The target clanged, dead center. Hit, 400 meters, the observer called, his tone flat at first, but with a trace of surprise that betrayed him. Murmurs rose behind her. A few trainees exchanged glances, their smirks thinning. Didn't look back, she was already adjusting. 700 meters, a harder shot. The mist blurred the steel plate just enough to make it swim. She dialed the scope, but not fully. Her grandfather had taught her not to rely on numbers alone. Numbers could betray you if conditions shifted mid-breath. Instead, she trusted her body. The way her skin registered the direction of air across her face. The way her ears caught the shift in pitch when the wind turned against itself. She waited, patient. Another pause in her lungs, a heartbeat that felt endless. Then she squeezed. Clang, edge ring near perfect. The silence behind her deepened. This time no one muttered. She could feel Lieutenant Daniels watching her, though his footsteps hadn't moved. The final target loomed invisible. 1,100 meters, half a mile. The kind of distance where bullets curved with gravity, where the earth itself became a factor. She adjusted for drop, for humidity, for the tiniest tilt of wind she could barely sense. Her hands were steady, but her chest was tight, not from fear, from memory. She remembered Montana mornings, kneeling in snow so cold her fingers had gone numb, her grandfather beside her. He asked her once, "What do you see?" She answered, "A target." He'd shaken his head. "No, you see everything between you and it. That's the difference. Anyone can aim. Only a few can read the silence between." She exhaled now, slow, controlled, her body falling into the rhythm he'd carved into her years before. The trigger broke. A distant ring echoed, faint but clear. Metal struck at 1,100 meters. The range went still. Then the observer called, louder than necessary, "Impact, direct." No one clapped, no one cheered. It was too raw for that. It didn't make noise, it only stole breath. Rose slowly, the rifle cradled in her hands. Gravel clung to her elbows and uniform, but her posture was straight, calm. Lieutenant Daniels approached, his expression unreadable until he stopped just a step away. His eyes narrowed slightly as if he were trying to see through her. Finally, he asked the question that had been building since the first shot. "Who trained you?" Didn't speak. She reached into her pocket, fingers brushing the worn edges of the silver ID card. She handed it over. Daniels read the name. His jaw tightened, then relaxed, the shift subtle but unmistakable. "Samuel Ghost." The whisper traveled fast, spreading down the line like static through wires. A legendary name. A man most had only heard of in passing, always followed by silence. From the far side of the field, a colonel who had been observing stepped forward. His boots were steady, his face older than most but sharper than all. He studied the ID, then looked at her. "The Ghost saved my life he said quietly, not to her alone but to everyone within earshot. He made a shot no one else could, and today," his gaze locked on her, "I see him in your eyes." The words cut deeper than applause ever could. By the time she returned to the armory, word had spread. She passed soldiers who paused mid-step, their conversations halting. Some stared openly, others only glanced but didn't look away fast enough. They knew now. Her grandfather's shadow trailed her down every hall, and though respect began to replace doubt, it carried its own weight. Staff Sergeant Murphy, the man who dismissed her only days ago, appeared in the doorway. He didn't bark, didn't smirk. His voice was quiet, uneasy. "That adjustment you mentioned, about the firing line, could you show me?" She studied him, searching for mockery. There was none, only curiosity. She nodded, quiet as ever. In the days that followed, others came too, not to laugh but to learn. Soldiers asked how she read the wind without instruments, how she calculated ranges by eye, how she kept her breathing steady when everything else pushed for panic. She explained simply, sparingly, never boasting. Her words were practical, rooted in lessons she had been forced to absorb through repetition, silence, and failure. The same soldier who had once joked about her belonging in a kitchen sat across from her one evening as she cleaned her rifle. He didn't speak. He only watched. The quiet between them said more than an apology ever could. One afternoon, Lieutenant Daniels delivered a package to her quarters himself. Inside was a copy of a sniper training manual. Not just any manual, one her grandfather had helped write decades earlier. Finding an original edition was nearly impossible. Yet here it was, edges frayed, notes in margins, passed into her hands. "Thought you should have it," Daniels said, and left before she could answer. But the respect wasn't unanimous. Quiet resistance lingered. Whispers followed her in hallways. Some said she'd only been lucky, others that she was riding her grandfather's reputation, and a few that she was dangerous. Dangerous. The word struck deeper than they intended, because she knew, deep down, there was truth in it. Not because of her skill with a rifle, but because silence itself unsettled people. Her refusal to fit into the expected mold made her unpredictable, and unpredictability was a kind of threat. Still, she remained steady. When she was finally invited to address the unit during a weekly briefing, she stood at the front of the hall. 200 soldiers stared back, some skeptical, some curious, many now respectful. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "Honor doesn't come from ribbons or badges," she said, her tone even, her cadence slow. "It comes from people who stay quiet when they're mocked, who let actions speak louder than ego, who prove themselves without saying a word." Silence stretched when she finished. Not the silence of dismissal, but of recognition. Then slowly applause rose, not polite, not formal, genuine. In that moment felt something shift, not a victory, not acceptance, something quieter, the recognition that maybe, just maybe, her grandfather's lessons had not been buried with him. That night in the barracks, a younger female recruit approached her nervously. She held her rifle awkwardly, too tight, too tense. "Ma'am," the girl stammered, I've been scared to try marksmanship. Everyone says women aren't built for it." Looked at her for a long moment. Then she handed the girl her grandfather's old cleaning kit. "Tomorrow, 500 hours, range 7, wear something you don't mind getting dirty." The recruit's eyes widened, then softened with gratitude. She nodded quickly and left. Sat in silence after she was gone, her fingers tracing the worn wood of the rifle stock beside her. She thought of her grandfather again, of his final words, and she realized something she hadn't before. The shot that proved she belonged wasn't the one that rang out across 1,100 meters. It wasn't the one that carried her name through Fort Logan like fire. It was still waiting, in someone else's hands, in someone else's silence. And when that moment came, she would be ready, not as the ghost's granddaughter, but as the woman who had learned what silence could do. Why was she being called into the colonel's office? That question circled her thoughts as she walked the dim corridor, boots echoing against tile. She wasn't on any official roster for tactical operations. She wasn't supposed to be here at all, Not in this world of rifles and deployments. Logistics personnel didn't get summoned by commanders. But the guard outside the door had nodded her through without hesitation. The colonel was expecting her. Straightened her posture before knocking. Her uniform was plain, nothing to distinguish her from hundreds of others, but she carried herself differently now. A week had passed since the marksmanship test. A week since whispers of Ghost's granddaughter had flooded the base. She hated that name. She didn't want to be anyone's shadow, yet here she was, called forward by it. Enter, the voice came, low and commanding. She stepped inside. The office smelled faintly of leather and old coffee. Maps covered the walls, red pins marking distant places she'd only read about. The colonel stood behind his desk, his presence filling the space even before he spoke. At ease, his eyes studied her with the same intensity he'd shown at the range. "Do you know why you're here?" "No, sir." "You've caught attention." He leaned forward, resting both hands on the desk. "More attention than you probably want. There are people who think you don't belong here, and others who think you're exactly what we've been missing." Her chest tightened. She didn't reply. He slid a folder across the desk. "There's an exercise tonight. Not training. A field test. Simulated but real enough that people get hurt if they don't think straight. I need someone who sees differently, who won't follow the crowd just because it's easier." Her eyes fell on the folder. Inside were orders for a night operation, a capture-the-flag-style drill designed for reconnaissance units. Only this time, logistics personnel were barred from participating, except for her. "Sir, I'm not." "You're not cleared, you're not ready." His tone sharpened, but not unkindly. "That's exactly why you're the right choice. You don't carry the same assumptions. You don't chase ego. You read the field." Her grandfather's voice echoed in her memory. "Sometimes you're chosen, not because you asked, but because silence draws notice when noise fails." She nodded once. "Understood, sir." By dusk she was moving through the forest on the edge of base. The operation had begun. 2 squads against each other. Their mission: retrieve a beacon hidden in a ruined farmhouse a mile into the woods. Night vision gear, blank ammunition, flares. The rules were simple: don't get caught, don't get tagged, get the beacon. She wasn't part of either squad. She was the anomaly dropped into the middle without allies, without a side. Daniels had made it clear: "I want to see how you move when no one's watching, whether you hunt or hide." The forest closed around her, thick with shadows. Branches cracked under boots in the distance. Shouts echoed faintly, squads moving in formation, too loud, too careless. Crouched low, letting silence swallow her. The damp earth pressed cold against her palms. She slowed her breathing until it matched the rhythm of the night. Crickets, wind, heartbeat. She moved not toward the farmhouse but away, circling, watching. She remembered her grandfather's lesson: the first to chase the prize is the first to die. Watch, wait, let their greed blind them. Through the trees she spotted the first squad. 5 men, rifles up, moving too tightly clustered. Their night vision goggles glowed faintly green. She stayed still, letting them pass within 10 feet, her body pressed flat against the dirt. Not a branch shifted, not a breath betrayed her. Minutes stretched, then chaos erupted ahead. The second squad, springing an ambush. Blank rounds cracked, flares burst red. Shouts rose, curses thrown into the night. 2 men went down, tagged and out of play. Stayed back unseen. While both squads tore into each other, she angled away, slipping through the brush. The farmhouse rose ahead, a silhouette against the sky. Broken roof, shattered windows, walls leaning like tired shoulders. The beacon pulsed faintly from the attic window, a dim light visible only through night optics. She froze. Something was wrong. Her instincts screamed it. The beacon was too exposed, too obvious. A trap. She crouched lower, eyes sweeping the surroundings. And there, movement. A glint near the tree line. Someone had set an overwatch. She smiled faintly. It was a decent setup, but not decent enough. Flattening herself against the ground, she crawled slowly, silently, inch by inch. Her clothes snagged on thorns. Mud soaked her sleeves. She didn't flinch. Every movement was calculated, patient. Through her scope she found him, a soldier in overwatch, rifle steady, eyes locked on the farmhouse approach. He was waiting for the squads to rush in, waiting to cut them down one by one. But he never saw her. Tracked his breathing, his slight shift of weight. She didn't fire, blanks or not, it wasn't necessary. Instead, she slid behind him, so quiet the forest itself seemed to hold its breath. One hand pressed against his shoulder as she tapped him with the training marker. "Out," she whispered. He spun, eyes wide, disbelief etched across his face. Then he nodded, stunned silent, and stepped away. By the time the two squads reached the farmhouse, already bruised and battered from their skirmish, had slipped inside through the rear. She climbed the creaking stairs, careful to avoid the spots that groaned loudest. The beacon pulsed inches from her hand. She picked it up, tucking it against her chest. Then footsteps below, loud, hurried, too many. Both squads stormed the farmhouse, shouting, weapons raised. She was cornered. Or so they thought. Instead of hiding, she moved to the attic window. She looked down at the squads flooding in, their focus on each other, not on her. And with one calm motion, she raised the beacon above her head. "Exercise complete," she said quietly, voice carrying just enough to be heard. Every soldier froze, heads turned upward. She had the prize, alone. Silence swallowed the farmhouse. The only sound was the faint pulse of the beacon in her hand. Later, back at base, Lieutenant Daniels watched her drop the beacon onto his desk. His expression was unreadable for a long moment. Finally, he asked, "How?" She shrugged, shoulders small but steady. "I just listened." The corner of his mouth twitched, the closest he'd come to a smile. "Your grandfather would be proud." Her throat tightened, but she didn't respond. Pride wasn't the point, survival was. But alone in her bunk that night, stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep. For the first time, she wondered if she was walking a path she hadn't chosen. Was this really hers? Or was she trapped in the shadow of a man the world called Ghost? The question gnawed at her, long into the dark. Why her? That was the first question that burned through the briefing room when her name appeared on the roster. The operation was small, classified, and urgent. A convoy carrying sensitive equipment had gone missing near the border, and intelligence suggested it had been intercepted by an armed militia. A recovery team was needed, fast, precise, and quiet. And there, in black ink on the printed orders, was her name. Logistics Specialist. The room buzzed with disbelief. Some soldiers whispered too loudly, others exchanged sharp glances. She didn't move, didn't flinch. She sat with her hands folded, her face unreadable. At the head of the table, Colonel Hayes scanned the group. His voice cut through the murmurs like a knife. "She's on this team for a reason. Any questions about that can wait until after we succeed." Silence followed. Not agreement, just the silence of orders too heavy to challenge. Felt the eyes on her, heavy and suspicious. She lowered her gaze to the map spread across the table. The route was simple enough. A road wound through rocky hills, dotted with gullies deep enough to hide vehicles. The convoy had vanished at marker 17. The militia was likely camped nearby. The plan was straightforward: approach at night. Confirm presence of stolen equipment. Extract it or destroy it if recovery was impossible. No glory, no headlines, just work. When the briefing ended, she lingered. Daniels approached her quietly. His voice dropped so low it was nearly lost under the shuffle of boots leaving the room. "You don't need to prove anything to anyone out there. You hear me?" She met his eyes. They weren't hard, not tonight. They carried something closer to concern. She gave a single nod. But deep inside, she felt the old weight pressing again, her grandfather's shadow. She didn't want to prove herself. Not really. But she couldn't ignore the truth. They didn't believe she belonged here. and if this night went wrong, she might never get another chance to show them otherwise. The transport hummed in darkness as the team moved out. 8 soldiers in total. Engines low, headlights blacked out, the world reduced to vibration and breath. Sat near the rear, her rifle cradled across her lap. She traced the grooves in the stock, steadying herself. Every bump in the road shook through her bones, but her heartbeat was even. When the truck rolled to a stop, the desert night swallowed them whole. The air was dry, heavy with dust. Moonlight cast long shadows over the hills. The squad dismounted. Sergeant Murphy led the way, rifle up, posture tight. His skepticism hadn't faded since the briefing. Could feel it in the way he glanced back at her, short and sharp, as if daring her to falter. They moved in silence across rocky ground, boots crunching on gravel. The world was sharper at night. Every sound mattered. Every shadow carried weight. Half a mile in, Murphy raised his fist. The team froze. Ahead, faint light flickered through the trees. Campfire glow. Dropped low, pressing her body against the earth. Through her scope, she scanned the clearing. 3 vehicles, the convoy, but stripped. Crates open, contents scattered. Around the fire, armed men lounged with rifles slung carelessly. She counted quickly, 12, maybe more in the shadows. Murphy signaled the team to spread. The plan was simple: flank, assess, move in quiet. But's eyes caught something the others missed. On the ridge above the camp, half hidden in brush, a glint. A second campfire reflection, but wrong, not natural. A scope. "Overwatch," she whispered, barely moving her lips. Murphy frowned. "What?" "On the ridge, 11 o'clock. He hesitated, scanning. He didn't see it. None of them did, but she knew. The glint had the rhythm of breath behind it, subtle shifts no campfire ever made. Murphy cursed under his breath and signaled 2 men to adjust. Quiet, careful. Moments later, a muffled thump sounded, a blank round from training replaced here by the real crack of suppressed fire. The overwatch went still. The team moved again, this time with sharper caution. His chest tightened. If she hadn't seen it, they'd have walked into the kill zone blind. The militia below grew louder, laughter echoing. They weren't expecting resistance. That made them sloppy, but sloppy men with rifles were still lethal. The squad crept closer, 30 yards, 20. Then a shout ripped through the night. Too late. A guard had spotted movement. Rifles lifted. The clearing exploded with gunfire. The team hit the dirt, returning fire in controlled bursts. Tracers ripped the air. Bark splintered from trees. Shouts turned to screams as militiamen dropped. Pressed flat, scanning, calm amid chaos. One man broke from cover, charging for the vehicles. She tracked him, breath steady, squeezed, and the shot cracked through the night. He folded mid-stride. Her rifle stayed hot. Another target, another breath. She didn't rush, didn't panic. Each shot was deliberate, and each one landed. The squad pushed forward. Minutes dragged like hours. Finally, silence. The clearing stilled, the last echoes fading into the hills. Murphy barked orders, his voice ragged. "Check the crates now." Followed, heart steady but chest heavy. She knew before she saw it the equipment was gone. Not stolen. Moved. Only empty shells remained. She scanned the tracks in the dirt. Heavy, fresh. Vehicles had left within the last hour, heading north into the ridges. "They moved it," she said quietly. Murphy glanced at her, then down at the ground. His jaw tightened. For once, he didn't argue. The colonel's voice crackled through comms minutes later, low and sharp. "Abort recovery. Too far gone, fall back. Extraction point is 2 clicks east." The team silent, weary. They survived, but the mission wasn't complete, not by a long shot. Back at base, reports were filed. Words like contact made, casualties inflicted, objective compromised. But between the lines was a truth no one wrote. They'd only survived because of her. Murphy didn't say it, not aloud, but his silence was different now. Not dismissal, not contempt, something else. returned to her bunk long after midnight. She sat on the edge, rifle across her knees, boots still dusty. Her hands trembled slightly now that the quiet had returned. She opened her grandfather's note again, reading the same faded words. The shot that matters most isn't the one that hits the target. It's the one that proves you belong there. Tonight she hadn't just hit targets. She'd seen what no one else did. She, spoken when silence might have cost lives. But still, the question gnawed at her as she stared at the ceiling. Did she belong because of her? Or because of him? The line between the two felt thinner than ever. What happens when silence becomes a weapon you can't put down? That was the thought that haunted as she sat in the back of the transport, the hum of the engine vibrating through the steel floor. Outside, the desert stretched endless, swallowing the horizon. She clutched her rifle close, the worn stock rough beneath her fingertips, grounding her. The convoy ambush had left questions unanswered. Sensitive equipment vanished, tracks leading north into hills no one wanted to chase. Intelligence now suggested the cargo had been moved deeper into militia territory, into a town so fractured that every street corner was claimed by a different flag. Officially, the mission was reconnaissance. Quiet entry, confirmation of location, report back. Unofficially, everyone knew it could unravel fast. The squad rode in silence, 8 men and her. Some shifted uncomfortably, checking gear, pretending not to notice her presence. Murphy sat across from her, arms folded, eyes closed as if asleep. But his jaw tightened each time the vehicle jolted. Daniel sat beside her. He leaned closer, speaking low. "This isn't training, you know that." "I know." He studied her face for a moment. "You don't have to carry him with you out there. You're not the ghost, you're you." She didn't answer, because part of her wasn't sure that was true. The vehicle slowed. The driver's voice carried back, one click out. They dismounted into shadow. The town rose ahead, crumbling walls, alleyways like broken veins, faint lanterns flickering in the dark. It looked deserted, too deserted. Murphy whispered into comms, eyes open. No sound unless necessary, rear guard. She took her position without protest. She wasn't here to lead. She was here to see what others missed. The squad moved in tight formation, weaving through alleys. Dogs barked somewhere in the distance. A door creaked open, then slammed shut. Curtains twitched. The town was alive but hiding. His pulse slowed. Her senses sharpened. Every detail mattered, the way a window shutter rocked against the wall, the faint drag of a boot on dirt to the left, the flicker of light that didn't match a lantern's sway. She caught it first, the rooftop. A shadow moved where no shadow should. She raised her hand. "Roof 2 o'clock." Murphy glanced up just in time. A muzzle flash lit the dark. Bullets shredded plaster. The squad dove for cover, returning fire in bursts. Shouts erupted down the street. More shadows poured from alleys, rifles raised. It wasn't reconnaissance anymore. It was a trap. Pressed against the wall, scanning. The squad fired blind into darkness, their angles bad, their panic worse. She steadied her breath, aligning her scope. The rooftop shooter leaned again. She fired once. He dropped. Another shadow moved through an alley too fast, flanking. She swung, squeezed, down. But for every shot she made, 2 more figures appeared. They weren't fighting soldiers. They were fighting a town that had already chosen its side. Murphy barked over comms, voice harsh with adrenaline. "Fall back, rally at East End." They moved fast, ducking, firing, dragging one man who'd taken a round in the leg. The alleys twisted like a maze. Bullets sparked off stone. Someone screamed, not one of theirs. A civilian. It was impossible to tell. His chest clenched. This wasn't the clean silence her grandfather had taught her in Montana. This was chaos, sharp and messy, and it left no time for thought. They reached the east edge, lungs burning, hearts hammering. The squad ducked behind a crumbling wall, catching breath. Murphy slammed a fist against stone. "We're not getting out clean. They'll cut us off before extraction. Scanned the skyline, forcing calm. And then she saw it, the glint of headlights faint half a mile out, vehicles, the stolen convoy. "They're moving the cargo," she said quickly. Murphy followed her gaze, swore under his breath. "We can't chase that now. We barely have men standing." But Daniels looked at her differently. "What if she's right? What if this is our only chance?" The colonel's voice crackled over comms, strained. "Priority is survival. Extraction zone now." Orders clear, but her eyes stayed on the headlights moving slowly north. This was the proof they needed, the mission's true purpose. If they let it slip, the trail would vanish for good. Her grandfather's words echoed, quiet but insistent. "The shot that matters most is the one that proves you belong there." She knew the risk, to break from orders, to chase when survival demanded retreat, but she also knew what it meant to let silence waste itself. Her breath caught, she turned to Daniels. "Give me 5 minutes." Murphy snapped, "Absolutely not. You break formation, you're dead." But Daniels didn't speak. He just held her gaze, and after a long moment he gave a single, imperceptible nod. "Moved alone." She slipped through the shadows, away from the squad, following the glow of the headlights. Her body moved like it had in the Montana wilderness, low, patient, every step measured. Gunfire echoed behind her, muffled now, distant. She didn't look back. Closer, she dropped prone against a ridge, scope trained. The vehicles rolled slowly, militia clustered around them. Through the green wash of night optics, she saw faces, rifles, crates strapped down. Proof. She exhaled, steady, not to fire, to remember, to memorize every detail. Her grandfather had taught her that sometimes the shot wasn't the trigger pull, sometimes it was the choice to wait. She whispered coordinates into comms, her voice calm. "Convoy sighted, North Ridge, multiple vehicles, copy." Daniel's voice came back, ragged but sharp. "Copy, fall back now." She stayed one breath longer, just one, watching the convoy disappear into the dark. Then she slipped back the way she came. By the time she returned, the squad was moving fast, wounded man supported between 2 others. They looked at her with disbelief. Murphy's face was thunderous, but he said nothing. Not yet. Extraction arrived in a roar of engines. They piled into the vehicle, hearts still racing. Dust swallowed the town behind them. Back at base, the debrief was sharp, cold. Hayes' voice cut like steel. "You broke orders." Stood at attention, jaw tight. She didn't defend herself, she didn't explain. Daniels stepped in before the silence stretched too long. "Sir, without her, we wouldn't have the convoy's direction. That intel alone just saved us weeks." Hayes studied them both. Finally, he said, "Results don't erase insubordination, but sometimes they redefine it." He dismissed the room. Murphy cornered her later, his face dark. "You think this makes you special? You think you get to rewrite how this works because you've got his blood in you?" She met his glare without flinching. "No, I don't think I'm special. I just think silence matters more than shouting." His jaw worked, but he said nothing. He walked away. That night, alone in her bunk, couldn't sleep. Her body ached, her ears still rang with echoes of gunfire. But worse was the weight in her chest. She'd broken orders and survived. She'd brought back intel no one else had seen. But in the shadows of her mind, one truth gnawed at her. She hadn't saved everyone. Civilians had screamed in that town. Shots had gone wide. She didn't know how many had fallen who weren't carrying rifles. And she couldn't stop wondering if silence had cost them, too. Why couldn't she shake the sound of that scream? It had been hours since they left the town behind, days even, but the echoes still threaded through her nights. She would lie in the barracks, eyes fixed on the ceiling, hearing it again and again, high, raw, cut short. She didn't know if it was a civilian. She didn't know if it was someone armed. She only knew that the silence after it had been heavier than anything she'd carried before. During the day, she moved like nothing had changed, cleaning her rifle, sitting in briefings, following orders with quiet precision. but inside, cracks formed. And each one made her wonder whether she was built for this world or if she was forcing herself into a shape she didn't belong in. The base itself didn't let her forget. Rumors spread fast. Soldiers talked about her breaking orders, about the convoy she'd spotted. Some respected her more now. Others whispered that she was reckless, that she thought she was untouchable because of her name. Murphy's glare followed her everywhere. Daniel's concern weighed on her shoulders. And Hayes, the colonel, watched her with a kind of patience that unsettled her more than anger ever could. She kept her silence, but silence wasn't as clean as it had been in Montana. Back then it had been peace, the space between her and the world. Now silence felt crowded, crowded with judgment, doubt, memory. It broke one night, when Daniels found her in the armory long after lights out. She sat cross-legged on the floor, the M24 laid out in pieces before her, the cleaning kit open. "You don't sleep much," he said softly, leaning in the doorway. She didn't look up. "Neither do you." He walked in, crouched near her. His eyes flicked to the rifle, then back to her face. "Murphy thinks you're dangerous." "I know. He's wrong, but he's not entirely wrong either." Her hands froze. The cloth paused against the bolt. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means you're carrying something none of us can see. You act like you don't hear them, but you do. And one day, that silence you wrap yourself in, it's going to break. And I need to know what's underneath when it does." She swallowed, throat dry. "You think I'm going to snap?" "I think you're human, and you're pretending you're not." The words stung, not because they were cruel, but because they rang too close to truth. She wanted to answer, to tell him about the scream, about the way it clawed through her dreams. But the words wouldn't come. Her grandfather had taught her to live in silence, not spill it. Daniel sighed, rose, and left her in the dim light. She sat alone until dawn, the rifle reassembled, her fingers numb. The next mission came faster than expected. A patrol unit had gone missing in the hills north of the last ambush. No comms, no signals. Intel suggested they'd been pinned by the same militia. Rescue was risky, but abandonment wasn't an option. Found herself on the roster again. She didn't protest. She didn't ask why. She only checked her gear and boarded the vehicle, the hum of the engine now too familiar. The hills were jagged, cruel in their silence. Rocks jutted like broken teeth. Wind cut sharp through the canyons, carrying whispers that weren't words. The squad dismounted, rifles raised, eyes scanning. Tracks led them deeper, prints scattered in sand. And then blood, not much, just enough to darken stone. Murphy swore under his breath. "They're close." They moved carefully, every step measured. Pulse slowed, her senses stretching outward. She felt the shift before she saw it, the way birds lifted suddenly from trees, the unnatural stillness after. "Ambush," she whispered. The first shot cracked a second later. The team dove for cover, bullets sparking off stone. Shouts echoed, sharp and foreign. "Pinned." Pressed against rocks, scanning. Militia on the ridge, 3. No, 4, moving fast. Their fire pinned the squad, keeping heads down. The wounded patrol wouldn't survive unless someone broke the angle. She steadied her breath, scope rising. One shot. The first man dropped. Another leaned too far, firing wildly. She squeezed. He crumpled. Murphy barked orders, pushing the team forward. The firefight raged, short and brutal. Dust rose in clouds. The militia broke, retreating into the hills. Silence fell again, heavy and raw. The missing patrol was found in a ravine, 3 wounded, 1 gone. Bloodied, shaken, but alive. The squad moved quickly, carrying them out. But stayed a step behind, her eyes still on the ridge. She couldn't shake the faces of the men she'd shot. They hadn't been skilled. Their fire was sloppy, desperate. They hadn't looked like trained fighters. Back at base, reports were filed again. Words like successful extraction, enemy neutralized, minimal losses. But none of it touched the truth in her chest. Those men hadn't stood a chance against her. She hadn't fought equals. She fought shadows with rifles. That night she broke. She sat on her bunk, staring at the rifle across her knees. Her hands trembled so badly she couldn't hold the cleaning cloth. The scream returned, overlapping now with the faces from the ridge. Her chest tightened until she could barely breathe. Daniels found her again, this time not in the armory but here, head bowed, hands clenched. He didn't speak at first, just sat beside her, the silence stretching long. Finally, he said, "You don't have to carry this alone." Her voice cracked. "I don't know if I belong here or if I'm just his shadow. I don't know if I'm dangerous." Daniels looked at her steady. "You're not your grandfather. You're not his shadow. You're something he couldn't be because you're asking questions he never let himself ask." She turned to him, tears burning at the corners of her eyes. "And what if the answers break me? Then we pick up the pieces. That's what this is. Not glory, not heroics. Just picking up pieces again and again until the silence makes sense." She looked down at the rifle, at her reflection faint in the worn steel. And for the first time she realized her silence wasn't empty. It was full of screams, of faces, of choices she couldn't erase. And the question she feared most wasn't whether she belonged. It was whether she could live with the weight of what belonging required. What happens when silence is no longer enough? That question pressed against her ribs as she sat in the briefing room, the map on the table swimming with red markers. A new operation, not reconnaissance, not rescue, an assault. The militia had grown bold. Emboldened by ambushes, they'd fortified an outpost deep in the hills. Satellite images showed vehicles, weapons stockpiled, patrols moving like ants around the perimeter. Intelligence believed the stolen equipment was inside. For weeks, the enemy had played ghosts in the night. Now they had a stronghold. The colonel's voice cut steady across the table. "We don't have the manpower for a full offensive. We'll insert a strike team. Small, surgical. We go in, dismantle command, destroy the stockpile, and we leave before they know what hit them." The roster was short, 10 names, among them. Murmurs rose, not loud but sharp enough to sting. Some still didn't understand why she was here. Others knew but didn't accept it. Murphy's jaw flexed, but he said nothing. Daniels glanced at her across the table. His eyes held no surprise, almost as if he'd expected her to be here. The colonel continued, "This mission carries weight. Intelligence suggests the enemy leader is on site. Capture is ideal. Elimination is acceptable. Either way, this ends tonight." The room went still. The weight settled heavy, thicker than the air. Later in the armory cleaned her rifle with hands steadier than she felt. The M24 gleamed under fluorescent light. Familiar, comforting. But tonight, comfort wasn't enough. She thought of her grandfather, of mornings in Montana. He'd spoken often of patience, of control, of the shot that mattered most. But he'd never spoken of leadership. He'd never prepared her for being the one others might look to when silence wasn't enough. And yet tonight she could feel it coming. The insertion was quiet. Helicopters skimmed low over the ridges, rotors muffled by the dark. The strike team dismounted into dust and shadow, boots sinking into sand. The air was sharp with the smell of fuel and stone. They moved fast, tight formation, every step calculated. The hills loomed above, jagged and cruel. The enemy outpost flickered faint with firelight ahead. Murphy led point, his voice low over comms. "2 guards northeast. Wait for patrol to pass, then we move." The team froze, pressed against rock. Scope swept the ridge. She counted not 2 but 3. The third lingered in shadow, half hidden. She tapped comms. 3, left side. Murphy scanned, irritation sharp in his tone. "I only see 2. Look again." A pause, then his exhale, copy adjusting. The silent acknowledgement was heavier than thanks. It was the first time Murphy had trusted her eyes over his. They slipped forward, eliminating the guards' quiet. Knives, suppressed fire, no alarms. Closer now. The outpost sprawled across a plateau, crude walls built from rusted metal, watchtowers rising uneven against the night. Fires burned in barrels, casting long, broken shadows. Men moved lazily, unaware of the storm creeping toward them. The plan was simple on paper. Breach, disable command, plant charges. Simple never survived contact. The breach came sudden. Explosives tore through the gate, fire erupting in orange and smoke. The squad surged forward, rifles spitting light. Shouts erupted, panic spreading through the camp. Moved with calm precision. Every shot deliberate, every breath steady. Men fell, some armed, some scrambling for cover. The air thickened with smoke, with dust, with the iron tang of blood. But then it shifted. The enemy faster than expected. Reinforcements poured from hidden tunnels, rifles raised, fire cutting through the night. The strike team faltered, pinned behind burning crates. Murphy cursed into comms. "We're outnumbered, falling back." But Daniel's voice cut through. "No, the charges. We leave without them. This was for nothing." The team froze, caught between survival and mission. Eyes flicked, uncertain in the chaos. And then they turned, not to Murphy, not to Daniels, but to her. Felt it in her chest like a stone dropped in still water. They were waiting, waiting for silence to become something else. Her hands shook once, then steadied. She scanned the field, smoke, fire, shadows moving. Her mind broke it down, piece by piece, like wind across a target. "There," she said, voice calm over comms. "South Tower, it's blind. We move under it, flank left. Plant charges on the fuel dump. Chain reaction takes the stockpile. We don't need all of it, just enough." Murphy hesitated. Daniels didn't. "You heard her. Move." They shifted, fast and low, slipping under the blind spot. Bullets cracked overhead, missing by inches. Felt the air move with each round, but her body didn't falter. She was already counting steps, breaths, seconds. They reached the fuel dump. Barrels stacked haphazard, the air sharp with fumes. Dropped to one knee, pulling the charges from her pack. Her hands moved steady, precise. One here, one there, linked. Above them, the tower guard finally noticed. A shout, a rifle raised. Snapped her scope up, breath frozen. The shot cracked. The man fell. Silence reclaimed the tower. She finished arming the charges. Set. They pulled back, moving fast, hearts hammering. The last militia fighters pressed in, desperate. But the countdown had already begun. The first explosion ripped through the night, fire swallowing the barrels. The second followed, a chain of thunder that lit the plateau like sunrise. The stockpile vanished in flame, heat rolling over them in waves. The enemy broke, scattering into the hills. Chaos reigned. The team, lungs burning, ears ringing. Behind them, the outpost collapsed into ruin, fire clawing at the sky. Extraction was a blur. Helicopters rising, rotors deafening, flames shrinking below. Back at base, the debrief was short. Mission accomplished, objective destroyed, enemy leader unconfirmed, losses none. But none of that mattered to her. What mattered was the moment in the fire when every eye had turned to her, when silence had ended and words had carried weight. In the barracks that night sat alone, rifle across her knees. For the first time, her grandfather's words felt distant. He had prepared her for silence, for patience, for the shot that proved she belonged. But tonight proved something else. Belonging wasn't just about surviving. It was about carrying others through the fire when no one else could. Her hands trembled faintly, not from fear but from the weight of it. Leadership, responsibility, the one thing her grandfather had never taught her. She whispered into the empty room, voice barely audible. "What now, Grandpa? What happens when they start listening?" No answer came, only silence, heavy, endless. And she knew the next mission would test not just her aim, but her soul. How do you know when a story becomes your own? That question lingered in his chest as she checked the bolt on her rifle one last time. The metal gleamed in the low light, worn but faithful. Her grandfather's weapon had carried her this far, but tonight she knew the rifle wouldn't be enough. The mission was different, not a strike, not reconnaissance, a defense. Intelligence confirmed it, the militia was coming. Retaliation for the outpost. Hundreds, maybe more, massing in the hills, preparing to sweep toward the base. They weren't trained soldiers, but numbers could drown skill. If they broke through, the cost would be more than equipment. It would be lives. The colonel's briefing had been clear. We hold this ground. There is no fallback. The base shifted into survival mode. Barricades rose. Ammunition was stacked. Medical tents swelled with supplies. The air smelled of sweat and anticipation, thick and metallic. Stood at the perimeter, her scope sweeping the hills. The horizon was quiet, too quiet, but she knew they were out there, waiting. Murphy walked past, his expression carved from stone. For once he didn't glare. He stopped, glanced at her rifle, then at her. His voice was low, steady. Make your shots count. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't praise. It was something harder. Respect forged under fire. Daniels appeared beside her, checking his gear. He spoke softly so only she could hear. When this starts, they'll look to you. You know that, right? She shook her head. I'm not. You already are. His words tightened something in her chest. She didn't want it, didn't crave leadership, but she knew he was right. Silence had carried her this far. Tonight, silence might not be enough. The first wave came at dawn. Dust rose on the horizon, shapes spilling from the hills like a flood. The ground shook under their boots, the air vibrating with shouts. The militia surged forward, rifles raised, banners fluttering. The base opened fire. Machine guns roared, mortars thumped. The line lit with flame and thunder. Dropped prone, scope rising, her breath slowed, the world narrowed. One target, one shot. The first man fell. Another leaned from cover, her trigger broke and he crumpled. Her rifle sang, steady and relentless. Each shot bought seconds. Each shot cut space from chaos. But the wave didn't stop. More poured from the hills, shouting, firing. Bullets cracked against barricades. Shrapnel tore sand into the air. The squad held, but barely. Murphy's voice barked over comms, harsh and ragged. They're pushing left flank. We'll break if we don't. Cut him off. Pull your men 2 meters back. Funnel them through the choke. There was a pause, then copy. The adjustment saved them. The militia crashed into the choke point, fire converging, bodies falling in heaps. Still they pressed. The second wave hit harder. Rockets streaked the sky, slamming into barricades. Smoke swallowed the field. Screams cut the air. His hand stayed steady, but her chest burned. She counted her rounds, measured each breath. Her grandfather's voice whispered in her memory, calm as always. The shot that matters most isn't the one that kills. It's the one that changes the fight. And then she saw it. On the ridge above, a commander stood shouting orders. His presence was magnetic, his voice cutting through the chaos. The militia around him, their charge surging. If he fell, the wave would break. She steadied her scope, lining the crosshairs. Distance, nearly 1,000 meters. Wind, cross-cutting, sharp. The shot was brutal, but it was possible. Her lungs tightened. This was Montana, this wasn't training. This wasn't her grandfather, this was her. She exhaled slow, pressed the trigger. The man dropped. Silence rippled across the ridge. Confusion, then panic. The wave faltered. Men broke, scattering, retreating into the hills. The field went still, save for smoke drifting in the morning light. The battle wasn't won, not fully, but the line had held. Back at base, soldiers moved like ghosts. Some laughed, relief sharp and desperate. Some cried, quiet and private. Others simply sat, staring at the ground, too drained for words. Cleaned her rifle alone. Her hands shook now when they hadn't in the fight, not from fear, from release, from the weight of silence finally giving way. Daniels found her there. He didn't speak at first, just stood watching. Finally, he said, that shot changed the fight. She shook her head. It wasn't the shot, it was the silence before it, the choice to wait to see. He smiled faintly. Your grandfather would have said the same. Her chest tightened, but this time it wasn't pain. It was something gentler, a thread pulled tight between past and present. Later during the debrief, the colonel addressed the unit. His voice carried weight, not volume. Some of you fought with fury, some with fire, but one among you fought with silence, and that silence saved us. All eyes turned to her. Stood slowly, the weight of their stares heavy. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Honor doesn't live in the noise we make, she said softly. It lives in the choices we carry, in the silence that asks us who we are when no one else is watching. The room stayed still, the words sinking deep. That night she opened her grandfather's wooden box again. The photograph, the ID card, the medal, and the note. She read the final line once more, the ink faded but clear. The shot that matters most is the one that proves you belong there. She set it down, her fingers lingering, and for the first time she whispered back into the silence. I belong, not because of you, because of me. No answer came, none was needed. The Montana mornings would always live inside her. The lessons, the silence, the legacy. But tonight she knew the truth. She wasn't a shadow. She wasn't just the ghost's granddaughter. She was. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.